sit back, relax, and turn on your tell-me-vision. Mary Kay and Johnny. This is a groundbreaking TV show of historical significance, but nobody knows about it. That's not totally true. I know about it, and now you do too. But why is this show so obscure nowadays? We'll get into that, but first it's important to know just what the show was. The first U.S. sitcom. Keep in mind, I'm not saying this is the first ever TV show. That distinction goes to a 1928 televised play called The Queen's Messenger. That was in the extremely experimental early days of television, and only a handful of people in Schenectady, New York were aware of it. I'm also not saying this is the first TV series. The BBC in England had been toying with regular series for a while. There were even some recurring TV shows in America. How does Mary Kay and Johnny differ from all this? It was the first scripted sitcom on television, what you can consider the first real TV series. This wasn't a dramatic play or anything news or sports related. It was just made for fun. The stars were real-life married couple Mary Kay and Johnny Stearns. Where did they come from? Who were Mary Kay and Johnny Stearns, and how did they get their own show in the first place? Johnny Stearns was a stage actor since the age of 14. He operated on the East Coast. Johnny was born in Massachusetts, but began his stage experience in New Hampshire. It wasn't long before his talent took him to Broadway, and he worked quite heavily. Johnny was not a big star, but he was a familiar face in New York. Most of his experience was in musical comedies, but he did do one serious role in the last production of the group theater. His wife, Mary Kay, was also no slouch in acting. Born as Mary Kay Jones, she started her stage career at age 2.5 in California. She also had a bit part in a comedy movie before going to Broadway. Mary Kay met Johnny by way of his mother. Johnny's mother, Edith, was the founder of the Peterborough Players in New Hampshire. Mary Kay thought a meeting with this lady would help further her career. It did, but not in the way she expected. While the ladies were having tea, Edith's son Johnny dropped by unexpectedly. There was an immediate attraction. Before the tea was over, Mary Kay knew she wanted to marry Johnny. The two married in 1946. Mary Kay, who looked young for her age, was offered a job as a fashion model for an early home shopping television program the next year. In 1947, Mary Kay was the model for J.J. Junior Dresses. It was filmed at the Wanamaker's department store in Lower Manhattan. The show was 15 minutes long, once a week, and simply featured Mary Kay wearing different dresses for young girls. It was sponsored by dress manufacturer J. Jossel. Both Stearns thought J. Jossel was a nice man, but had to admit the idea of the show was weak. Jossel himself later admitted his show's failure to Johnny. "Your wife is the cutest thing we ever saw, and we all love her," said Jay. "But I'm getting out of the television business. Most of the TV sets in New York are in bars. Guys in bars aren't going to buy little junior dresses." Johnny knew Mary Kay had appealed to audiences and still thought she should be on TV, but in something much better that people could relate to. He liked the husband and wife shows that were so popular on radio like Burns and Allen and others. He thought it would be a blast to do a comedy show on TV where they played fictionalized versions of themselves. He proposed his idea to Jay Jossel as a replacement show for that time slot. Well, at this point, Jossel was about ready to give up his sponsorship. He would give the time slot to Johnny under one condition. Jossel had a friend who made cosmetic compacts. If Mary Kay pitched the product at the end of the time slot of their first show, and if it resulted in the sale of 200 compacts, the duo could take over the time slot permanent. The first episode of Mary Kay and Johnny debuted November 18th, 1947 on the Dumont Television Network, Tuesday night. It was just 15 minutes long at that time. Per the agreement, Mary Kay promoted the compacts at the end of the show. Long story short, Jostle's friend sold way more than 200 compacts. He presented a contract to the couple to continue the show full time. Why the name? As far as Johnny knew, every show business couple at that point had the man's name billed first. For instance, Burns and Allen, Jack Benny and Mary Livingston, and so on. Johnny really felt Mary Kay was the heart of the show and thought her name should be first. He believed this was the first time a woman in a comedy team ever got her name placed first. The Dumont Network. I don't want to stray too far from talking about Mary Kay and Johnny, but before I go too much farther, I'd better explain what the Dumont Television Network was. Dumont was one of the pioneer television networks, first airing in 1946. It rivals NBC for the distinction of being the first TV network. The medium of television was a long time coming. Before it became a reality, television was the stuff of science fiction. Some real high-tech stuff. The invention existed in its experimental form. NBC actually had station-to-station television links as early as 1940, but Dumont received its station licenses before NBC resumed its sporadic network broadcasts after World War II. ABC and CBS did not start their television networks until 1948. For a while, there were 4 big networks. Dumont was the first of these to go under in 1956. Why did it fail? They actually had some very successful TV shows. Dumont certainly put in the effort that the other 3 did, but there were some disadvantages Dumont had to deal with early on. For one, it was the only TV network that wasn't already established in radio. Dumont didn't have a lot of big money to throw around, and they couldn't draw in a lot of big-name radio stars because these celebrities already worked for the other 3. The network was able to get some accomplished film actors for their shows, but a lot of the talent was unestablished newcomers. Certain FCC restrictions, beginning in 1948, crippled Dumont's growth from the start. It was certainly more to the advantage of the 3-letter networks. Dumont was forced to rely on UHF, ultra-high frequency, to expand, while the other 3 networks used VHF, very high frequency. A lot of people who had television couldn't get Dumont. Basically, Dumont was squeezed out of existence. Also, TV just wasn't as profitable in the late 1940s as it was by the mid-1950s. Dumont had a hard time making a profit, and had no choice but to shut down. A lot of TV historians believe that if Dumont could have used VHF like the other networks, it would have lived on and become quite successful. All of this is important to the story of Mary Kay and Johnny. The early days of Mary Kay and Johnny. After the first successful episode of the series, Mary Kay and Johnny hit the ground running. Dumont was always low budget, so the couple had to make do with what they had. Although the Stearns collaborated on the scripts, Johnny was the writer. He was the primary writer for much of the series. He was also the producer. For being a young man in show business, he had a lot put on him at once. Johnny never claimed that he was a professional writer, even in his later years. However, I think he sold himself short. He may not have started out as a professional writer, but he certainly gained a lot of experience along the way. Through much experience, he became as good of a TV show writer as anyone. There is an old adage for writers: write what you know best. Mary Kay and Johnny both wanted to keep things real, even though they were still acting. Their screen characters were just slightly exaggerated versions of themselves. They thought it would make their performances more believable to viewers and more relatable. The program was broadcast live. Sometimes there would be pre-shot pieces of film inserted, but the show was always performed live. Mary Kay and Johnny were live performers. Everything back then on TV was done live anyway. They had no time for rehearsals on the set, so that had to be done at home. And there were no retakes. Any mistake made would end up in the broadcast. Fortunately for them, they were good enough actors and didn't make a lot of obvious flubs. They were very comfortable working together and with the material they were performing. Audiences liked this because they seemed like real people and likable individuals. Most of the action took place on a set that represented a New York City apartment in Greenwich Village. From time to time, some different sets would be used to accommodate the stories, but their apartment was the primary location. Johnny was a bank employee. Mary Kay was a zany, but not dumb, housewife. This setup was based on Mary Kay's parents. Her father was actually a banker, and her mother a homemaker. Mary Kay's mother was played by Nydia Westman. Johnny's friend Howie was played by Howard Thomas. Their real dog Duke was also in the show. Almost every TV show back then had an announcer. Theirs was Jim Stevenson. Reluctant celebrities. Mary Kay and Johnny Stearns had an uncommon take on show business. They liked doing the show. They even appreciated being recognized on the street. The Stearnses were very grateful for all of the fan mail. But with all this, the couple didn't think of themselves as celebrities, and really didn't want to be celebrities. The Stearnses were very private people, and were more focused on family than anything else. Although they liked working, they were certainly not the neurotic show business types who desperately tried to maintain the fame at any and all costs. They were more real than that. It's this quality that makes the idea of their show seem more genuine and endearing. The guest stars of Mary Kay and Johnny. Although a lot of the people who appeared on the show weren't famous at the time, they would later go on to have great careers in show business. Jack Gilford played Artie Heffelfinger, the local grocer who made deliveries to their apartment. When Gilford was no longer available, the character was replaced by a grocery delivery boy named Dwight Spingbarn. Gilford became a big-time character actor in TV and movies and a major Broadway star. He also did a successful run of commercials for Cracker Jack. Eric Fleming appeared on the show before his later fame as the star of TV's majorly successful Western series Rawhide. James Whitmore played a cop. He later became a very successful and heavily awarded actor. Ruth McDevitt, a successful character actress who specialized in playing daffy old ladies, appeared on the show. Jack Davis, former child actor of Our Gang comedies, appeared in the show. He would continue to play small parts in TV and movies well into old age. Howard Morris, who later became very successful as an actor, director, and voice actor, appeared in the show. Perhaps his best known credit is Ernest T. Bass on The Andy Griffith Show. Sharing a Bed. Mary Kay and Johnny was the first program to show a couple sharing a bed. This show was pretty tame, even at that time. It's hard to believe anyone would be bugging about this, but through much of the 1960s, it was still taboo to show a man and woman in bed on television. That certainly isn't a concern anymore. How did Mary Kay and Johnny get away with sharing a bed? For one thing, there weren't a whole lot of people in the country watching TV in 1947. The letter-writing watchdog groups were yet to come. It was also known that they were a real-life married couple, so it wasn't sinful. Plus, this was early television. The bed was more of a prop than anything else. They weren't going to get frisky on screen. As TV grew in popularity and became a bigger business, more people started to get involved with the decision-making process. Between sponsors, network executives, and producers, things got very restricted on television by the 1950s. In a very short period of time, the groundbreaking things Mary Kay and Johnny did on their show were not allowed on TV for years. The move to NBC. From the first episode on November 18th, 1947 to August 24th, 1948, the series was aired on the Dumont Television Network. It appeared once a week on Tuesday nights for 15-minute episodes. It wasn't a national show at this time. It started out as a local show in the New York City area. As time went on, it went up and down the East Coast. Mary Kay and Johnny were thrilled when it went as far west as Chicago. They thought that was a real big deal. Eventually, the show caught the attention of the Whitehall Pharmaceutical Company. This is the company that made Anacin and Kolynos toothpaste. They wanted to sponsor Mary Kay and Johnny, but they wanted to move the show to NBC, a bigger national network. This was a move the Stearnses had to make. They weren't making much money at Dumont, and they operated on a shoestring. Quite simply, they outgrew their network. Sponsorship on a bigger network would, for one, get them paid, and two, make bigger and better shows. At NBC, they had a better set and a much bigger crew. Whitehall was a bit reluctant to sponsor the show at first. Their advertising executives thought they might be wasting money sponsoring the show. They believed the viewership might have been too sparse. There was no such thing as the Nielsen ratings. That didn't come until 1950. How could Whitehall determine the size of Mary Kay and Johnny's audience? During one commercial spot, Whitehall, through Anacin, offered a free pocket mirror to the first 200 viewers who wrote in requesting one. To be on the safe side, Whitehall actually purchased 400 mirrors. The free mirrors were only offered during that one commercial spot. Imagine everyone's surprise when nearly 9,000 requests came in. Yep, Mary Kay and Johnny had an audience. The first NBC episode aired on October 10th, 1948. It now aired on Sunday nights. The biggest format change is that it was increased to a half-hour show. It could certainly be a bigger and better show at 30 minutes, but Johnny was still the writer, and the longer scripts really tapped him out. It was hard for him to come up with material. Any mundane little thing that happened in their real lives would make it into the show, although exaggerated for comic effect. The first pregnancy on television. Mary Kay and Johnny was the first series to show a woman's pregnancy on television. I Love Lucy, incorrectly, gets the credit for this one. Mary Kay actually became pregnant in 1948, during the time they were still at Dumont. She tried to hide her pregnancy for a while, but it didn't work. Everyone thought it would be good for the show, so they used the pregnancy storyline. Lucy didn't do this until 1952. The Stearns' baby, Christopher, actually played himself on the TV series. He made his debut in the December 31st, 1948 episode and was just 10 days old. It went into Ripley's Believe It or Not that Christopher was the youngest performer on television. Christopher Stearns became as important to the show as Little Ricky would be on I Love Lucy years later. This was a big deal for TV viewers back in the day. The stars received all kinds of fan letters, cards, and gifts concerning the baby. The brief move to CBS. Mary Kay and Johnny kept getting bigger and bigger. After February of 1949, the show moved from NBC to CBS. Why? Whitehall wanted to move the show to a bigger network. They were also willing to throw a lot more money at it. Whitehall wanted to hire writers for the show. Naturally, Johnny was thinking, "Oh, thank God, yes." However, the deal wasn't as sweet as it sounded. Mary Kay and Johnny looked over the scripts Whitehall was handing them. Both of the stars deemed these scripts highly inappropriate. The scripts were filled with stuff that was so far detached from the show they established that it wouldn't be the same show. For instance, characters were going to come into the apartment throwing fits and doing all kinds of wild things. Mary Kay and Johnny prided itself on being gentle comedy, and what Whitehall wanted to do was make it in-your-face type of comedy. Johnny told Whitehall that as much as he wanted writers, these writers weren't getting it. Whitehall didn't want to relent, so Mary Kay and Johnny lost their sponsor. The show's time on CBS ended before summer came around. The move back to NBC. NBC immediately hired Mary Kay and Johnny back, without a sponsor. It was still a hit show, and they would have been foolish to pass it up. It was a good thing for Mary Kay and Johnny as well. When they first came back to NBC, it was during the summer. The popular children's show, Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, wanted to take the summer off. That was a 5-day-a-week show. As a favor, Mary Kay and Johnny agreed to be a replacement show 5 days a week, but for only 15-minute episodes. Doing a half hour a day would have really killed them, especially since Johnny was still the main writer. During this time period, until Kukla, Fran, and Ollie returned, things were very stressful for the Stearnses. As soon as they got done with one day's show, they would go home to rehearse for the next day's show. They didn't do anything else. This was too much of a grind. In late 1949, the show returned to being once a week for half-hour episodes, this time on Saturday nights. The strain of writing began to take its toll on Johnny creatively. His ideas had dried up. The Stearnses did have some luck with a few writers in the last year or so of the show, but these writers moved on to other projects after a while. This was always pretty common in TV, even back then. Then Johnny was back to doing all of it again. Meanwhile, the show had no sponsor. NBC was paying the way for the whole thing. Consequently, things were getting a bit harder to approve. Without a sponsor and a good budget, there was no way the show was going to get bigger and splashier. It was a mutual decision between Mary Kay and Johnny and NBC to end the show on March 11th, 1950. It had been on the air for nearly 2.5 years. Pretty decent for back then. It is uncertain how many episodes were made. It was never meant to be the complete end of the Mary Kay and Johnny show. The Stearns' original idea was for Mary Kay to have their second child, then they would bring the series back. Life works out funny sometimes, and this never came to be. What was next for Mary Kay and Johnny? By the time Mary Kay was ready to work again, after their second child, Johnny was producing and directing shows for NBC. The Stearns still had a good relationship with the network. Most likely, NBC would have agreed to bring the show back at some point in the future. Johnny didn't want to give up what he was doing. He remembered his time of continuous writing for the show as painful. He also preferred the behind-the-scenes aspect of television, although he had enjoyed acting with his wife very much. Johnny did feel, however, that Mary Kay deserved to be on another show. Johnny talked with the vice president of NBC, and what came out of it was a new show called Mary Kay's Nightcap. This was a weekly series that ran during the 1951-52 season on NBC. It was a late-night show and a way of signing off for the network. She would tell the viewers what would be on television the following day, along with doing some interviews. Mary Kay would blow the audience a kiss at the end of the show. One night, a friend of the Stearns' came to see Mary Kay do her show. His name was Alan Handley, and he was a director who had just been hired to put Dinah Shore on television. Alan liked the way Mary Kay blew her kisses. He didn't have any other idea for how Dinah should end her shows. Alan asked Mary Kay if it was alright for him to have Dinah blow a kiss. Mary Kay said, sure. Alan didn't have time to instruct Dinah on how delicate Mary Kay blew her kisses, so Dinah did it very big and over-accentuated. This immediately became Dinah Shore's signature, but it started with Mary Kay Stearns. U.S. Steel. Johnny had been producing, and Mary Kay had been freelancing. Both of them were doing quite well. Besides Mary Kay's Nightcap, Mary Kay did an episode of Armstrong Circle Theater in 1951 and an episode of Kraft Television Theater in 1952. she was also still working on the stage and trying to make it big in Broadway. Johnny, in a rare TV appearance without Mary Kay, was also in an episode of Armstrong Circle Theater. Meanwhile, the U.S. Steel Company was putting together a TV show. It would be a weekly anthology series. Every episode was dramatic, but for the commercial spots between acts, they wanted a real-life show business couple to do some lighthearted ads for U.S. Steel. This couple would also have to be available to appear at state fairs, conventions, and other public appearances. U.S. Steel was very methodical in their search for a show business couple. It took them a year to do it. They went down a list and came across Mary Kay and Johnny. The company wanted to make sure that whoever they selected was a good image for them. For instance, they wanted to be sure the couple would stay married. They also ran some intense background checks. U.S. Steel didn't want any chance of scandal. Mary Kay and Johnny were about as clean as you could get, so they got the job. The money the Stearnses were paid by U.S. Steel was outrageous. It afforded them a brand new house in Dobbs Ferry, New York. The happy couple actively wanted to learn about the steel industry so they could be the best spokesman possible. The United States Steel Hour started in 1953 on ABC. Mary Kay and Johnny were their representatives for 3 years. Johnny the producer. Johnny did a lot of notable producing work in the years that followed Mary Kay and Johnny. In 1953, he produced the original version of The Tonight Show with Steve Allen before it became a national show. At this time, it was just called The Steve Allen Show. Johnny only quit producing that show because of the lucrative U.S. Steel deal. The Arthur Murray Party was another popular show he produced and directed for a while. He also produced, as well as directed, the original 1958 version of Make Me Laugh, a comedy game show. There have been a number of revivals since in America and Britain. None of them last very long, but for some reason this concept had enough appeal to keep being brought back. Sometime in the late 1950s, either around 1958 or 1959, the Stearnses moved to California. Johnny continued his producing career. Mary Kay, on the other hand, largely gave up on the idea of show business in favor of raising their 3 children. In 1960, Johnny produced the 32nd Academy Awards. His longest stint as a producer would be NBC's Agriculture USA from 1961 to 1990. The show's title was later shortened to Ag USA. Johnny himself actually recorded a promo for the show's final episode in 2001, only days before he died. Johnny's producing career is what kept the couple going. Over the years, the Mary Kay and Johnny show, and the stars themselves, became more of an obscurity. Why? It was almost impossible to see an episode of the show. After their stint with U.S. Steel ended, you just didn't see them. Since they were very early television, they weren't heavily merchandised like I Love Lucy and so many later shows. This begs the question: where did the episodes go? In one of the greatest tragedies of television history, most episodes of Mary Kay and Johnny are believed to be completely lost. This is an extremely gross oversight for a TV show that is so historically significant. Part of the blame can be given to the technology of the time. Anytime you see a really old TV show from the 1940s to early 1950s, it was recorded as a kinescope. What is a kinescope, you might ask? Quite simply, it is a recording of a TV program on motion picture film when the camera is pointed directly at the screen of a video monitor. Some kinescopes are passable, but many are lousy. They have glare and they're fuzzy, a universe apart from high definition. Still, they're good for the fact that they are the only proof that early TV shows even existed. Sadly, the first several months of Mary Kay and Johnny were never recorded on kinescopes at all. Those are totally lost to time. Even when the show started to make kinescopes, Only special episodes were preserved due to budget constraints. The earliest kinescope of the show was made in 1948. The kinescopes did survive for some time until the 1970s. Dumont's corporate successor, Metro Media, dumped nearly everything of Dumont's television archive in the East River in 1975. Why? To make more room for themselves in their warehouse. This wasn't a wise move on Metro Media's part. Then again, they weren't a completely wise company and went out of business in 1997. You can still find some rare kinescopes of Dumont shows on the internet or cheap DVDs, but this is a small percentage of the network's output. I would like to think that there are more Dumont shows out there that got saved from taking a bath. Maybe some old film reels are sitting in someone's basement or a warehouse. Things like this happen. CBS destroyed its earlier recordings in the 1970s, including Mary Kay and Johnny. This is perhaps the greatest loss to the series, as they had their biggest budget at this time. We could see real top quality early television if these shows existed. The fate of the NBC episodes is mostly unknown. Also in the early 1970s, they were throwing out old TV shows that they could not get their stars to take. For many years now, only one full 15-minute episode of the series is known to exist. This episode dates from June 13, 1949. It is currently held by the Paley Center for Media. In 2002, TV Land aired a documentary called Taboo TV. In this, a clip of Mary Kay and Johnny was used that showed them in a bed. The episode Paley Center has does not feature such a scene. So what does this mean? It means that NBC is keeping what they have of Mary Kay and Johnny under lock and key. Are there more full episodes out there? Or are there only some clips that have survived? Why is the existence of this show being held back from everybody? The legacy of Mary Kay and Johnny. Johnny Stearns died at the age of 85 in December 2001. The exact day of his death, for some reason, varies from source to source. Many sources claim December 1st. Another source says December 5th. However, the earliest obituary I could find is from December 9th. The cause of death was complications from a fall. Mary Kay passed away at the age of 93 on November 17, 2018. She was only one day away from the anniversary of their TV show's very first episode. At that time, it would have been 71 years. They had 3 children, Christopher, Melinda, and Jonathan. They also had a grandson. At the time of their deaths, they were still living in California. Mary Kay and Johnny have a legacy that shouldn't be reduced to small factoids for TV trivia buffs. Of course, it would be great if more of their shows surfaced and were available to watch in some form. I am curious to know if there are any scripts from this show in existence. If so, how cool would it be to recreate these shows as they might have been done from 1947 to 1950? New actors would have to be found. The productions wouldn't have to cost much money because the original series wasn't made at top dollar. I think people nowadays would really appreciate the laid-back charm of the show. Mary Kay and Johnny, in a sense, can live on forever. One place you will always find Mary Kay and Johnny, anytime you like, is on Tell-Me-Vision.
Riding with my gal beside me, I'm as happy as can be. Ho-lo-dee, ho-lo-dee, ho-lo-dee. I asked her if she'd marry me, she blushed and then said yes, sirree.